everybody, welcome back. It's Elizabeth from shockinglyme.com, and today we are going to try not to get overly distracted by true crime while talking about a true crime book. So we have A Loving Wife with a Deadly Plot, To Have and to Kill by John Glatt. Not excited about the things that happened and the content of this book. I am just excited that someone did a deep dive into it. So some backstory. I recently I know a couple of people who both worked at the place where, if you don't know anything about this, I probably should have started with that. Hold up, let's change my train of thought real quick. So we're going to start with a letter from Charles E. Spicer Jr., phenomenal name. He's or at least was at the time that this book was printed, the executive editor at St. Martin's True Crime Library. So, dear reader, in this case listener, the book you are about to read is the latest bestseller from the St. Martin's True Crime Library. The imprint New York Times calls the leader in true crime. Each month, we offer you a fascinating account of the latest, most sensational crime that has captured the national attention. Apparently, I'm also now plugging for St. Martin's. St. Martin's is the publisher of best-selling true crime author and crime journalist Kieran Crowley, who explores the dark, deadly links between a prominent Manhattan surgeon and the disappearance of his wife of 15 years earlier in The Surgeon's Wife. Note to self, we're going to read that one next. And by next, I mean further down the list, because I have a ton of books to read. Susie Spencer's Breaking Point guides readers through the torturous twists and turns in the case of Andrea Yates, the Houston mother who drowned her 5 young children in the family's bathtub. Side note, if you have not yet read Red-Handed, the Red-Handed podcast book by Cerruti and Hannah, I did a book review of it a couple months ago. But read that book. I thought the research and the effort that they put into it was amazing. I have not read Susie Spencer's Breaking Point, but the very in-depth look that both Hannah and Cerruti take to look at Andrea Yates is really, really interesting. It puts a lot of things in context, and it also kind of balances out, oh my God, this sensational mother who killed her children, and takes a greater step back to look at how things like that happen and what we can do as a society to help prevent those things. So definitely, if you don't know anything about that case, again, I can't speak to Susie Spencer's Breaking Point, but I can speak to the Red-Handed book, and I'll try to link or remember to link my book review of that along with the book in the notes below. So, back to this. In Edgar Award-nominated Dark Dreams, legendary FBI profiler Roy Hazelwood and best-selling crime author Stephen McCloud, sorry buddy, shine light on the inner workings of America's most violent and depraved murderers. In the book you now hold, I should have just read this. To Have and to Kill, acclaimed author John Glatt takes you along for the ride as he discovers the truth behind a suitcase filled with body parts. I thought that was going to be more impactful to give you an idea of what we're talking about, so I'm just going to read the back cover real quick. William and his loving wife, a registered nurse named Melanie, had just closed on their New Jersey dream home. Little did William know about the nightmare that was in store, for Melanie had been involved in a long-term affair with a married doctor at the fertility clinic where she worked, and she had plans for a future that didn't include William. Investigators believe, if you don't know anything about this case, you're about to. Investigators believe that on April 29, 2004, Melanie first drugged her husband, then murdered him in cold blood. 3 years after, America witnessed the details of the suitcase incident unfold on 48 Hours, Dateline NBC, and ABC Primetime, and in People magazine, among other news outlets. Melanie was convicted of first-degree murder and desecrating human remains. This is the true story of a marriage that turned deadly. To Have and to Kill. So, back to what I was saying before I got all distracted. I know 2 people who worked at the fertility clinic around, not when she was there, but I'm pretty sure within close proximity. I also have a friend who's a family friend of a family friend of a friend, something to that effect. So I had heard about this from 2 different people. One recommended this book. One actually sent me a link to a podcast. So I listened to the podcast first, not having a ton of background knowledge, just that like this woman killed her husband, chopped him up, for lack of a better nice way to say that, and put his body parts in suitcases and dumped them in the Chesapeake Bay. So that's all I knew. So I listened to the podcast, and my issue with the podcast is it claims it is going to do investigative work and be completely unbiased. However, when you listen to it, it doesn't really come across that way. It starts out well, but then there's a couple of moments, and they pick up a little more and more where you're like, I can't really generalize like that. And you can't, in my opinion, if you're going to say unbiased, you can't have a bias. It's not what unbiased means. And they questioned a lot of her behavior based on like, well, no one would do that. And like, there are people who do that. There are people who I know who have had domestic violence, domestic abuse, domestic situations where they have gotten a restraining order and then sought out that person, not necessarily to make contact with them, but like to see where they were, So the 2 podcast hosts swore up and down that like no one would do that if they were, really that afraid. And I know people who have, so you can't say, in my opinion, if you're going to say you're unbiased, you can't say things like that. Anywho, maybe I'm nitpicking. But my other friend, the one who worked at the same clinic, she recommended this book. And what I will say is, we're not talking about true crime. This book does a phenomenal job of telling this story through facts, through evidence, in a very organized way to give you a full picture of what happened or what investigators believed happened, what Melanie was convicted of, what evidence they had, who said what at what trial, pointing out like, okay, they said this, but then later said this, and this is an inconsistency, or she said this and then later said that, and that might be an inconsistency. So John Glatt did a great job of telling this story, in my opinion, and making it a way that was easy for someone to understand all like the little nuances. There were a couple of discrepancies between what the podcast said and what the book said. The book makes it sound very much like there were phone records that they could use or reference and did reference in court, whereas the podcast said that they never got Melanie's cell phone records. So I don't know. I haven't done extensive research on it. Again, I'm not doing a true crime conversation, although I will talk to anyone about true crime. It's a thing. So again, I don't really know what is the 100% truth. I didn't do any additional research for that, but sorry, I closed all my windows again so people could hear me, and it's hot in here. I'm also wearing a sweatshirt, which is not my finest idea. Anywho, so yes, I think that it's a well-written book. I think that the way he tells the story is meaningful. There's also pictures, which is kind of nice because when so many different locations and people are referenced, and these are real people. So on the one hand, it's really, really, really sad that, someone, sad and horrifying that even if you don't believe it was Melanie, or if you do, or whatever your opinion is on that, someone took another human being and not only murdered them, but like desecrated them and destroyed their remains, and obviously did it as a way that shows I don't care and I don't want to get caught. And so that's heartbreaking in and of itself. But these are real people. And so, both in the podcast actually and the book, Bill's best friend and his wife were referenced, and you get like a sense of who they are in hearing about these things. And it's great that like there are pictures in here, and it's, a moment where the picture is after Melanie's been convicted, and like now their friend, you can never really get closure when someone murders a person that you love, but like you can get that sense of justice. So it's so great to see how happy they are, and like Bill's sister, and so it's really interesting, and I think it's well written. My biggest knock on this is that anytime there's a woman good, I thought I hit pause. Anytime there's a woman, if it's an investigator, a prosecutor, a witness, he takes the time, and the characters, to be like, she was an attractive blonde. She was another attractive blonde. She's petite. Then the one that really lit a fire right under my butt, and I can't, you think I'd remember the exact word, but he basically tried to politely be like, the chubby girl, which, like, okay, cool. You have your opinions. Obviously you're into blondes. I'm not knocking you. You do you. But we're talking about true crime. None of the men in this book are described specifically as, like, being attractive, which I will say, there are a lot of they're not described as attractive, but there are a lot of references to Joe Tacopina and what he looks like and what his tattoos are. So maybe I'm being dramatic, and I could be. It was one of those things that caught my eye. Like, every blonde woman is described as an attractive blonde, and, like, he makes a big point about the prosecutors, Patty Prezzioni, I can't remember her last name, but the prosecutor's hair. Like, I have curly hair. It lost a lot of its curl once I started getting highlights when I was younger, and it did some damage, and once I went on birth control, so, like, it messed up my curls, but they're coming back. But, like, humidity, not good for us. Rain, real bad, not good. Like, if I ever wanted to be taken seriously and someone was like, oh, her hair is not so good today, I mean, thankfully, I don't care about being taken that seriously. It's something I should probably work on. But, like, it just, I don't know. My tangent's over. My rant is over. Someone else got very upset about it, or a couple people got upset about it in the reviews. But I'm not saying you shouldn't read it because of that. It's my biggest knock on how he wrote this book. So, again, I would recommend it if you like to understand the different aspects of not only an investigation, how this case was investigated, how it was tried, the different, aspects of that. He didn't mention everything that was going on with Joe Tacopina, which the podcast made a really big deal about. Like, in the midst of Melanie's trial, her attorney actually had his own legal battles, and, whether or not that was cause for a mistrial, whether it's cause enough for her to warrant a retrial because it was ineffective counsel. So it's just interesting to see the two different sides. I'll link the podcast below too. I didn't finish listening to it. No one be mad at me, or be mad at me. It's cool. There's like 17 episodes. I listened to 16 of them. The last one, which was supposed to be what their actual opinions were, at that point, the book had come in from the library and I wanted to read it, so I just haven't doubled back to it yet. But the last one in particular talks about what their feelings are and if they feel that she's innocent or guilty, and, like, the decision in their opinion. So I haven't gotten to that yet. Who knows? Maybe they only sound partially biased throughout it and then are going to think that she did it. I have an opinion. I actually referenced it I think 2 book reviews ago. Almost all, we're going to get true crimey for a second. Almost all of the evidence in this case seems to be circumstantial. So I don't really know. Based on the podcast, I was like, I definitely am not on board with this being like a sound conviction. But I do believe that she had some involvement in it. Whether or not she actually did it or just was involved in doing it, I can't say for certain. But once I read the book, I was like, okay, the circumstantial evidence laid out in this seems a lot more compelling to not really challenge that conviction. But as a note, she claims to this day that she's innocent. And I think there's also a Lifetime movie. If someone just told me this the other night, I think it's a Lifetime movie coming out based on this story. So we'll see what Lifetime does with it. But that is everything in a nutshell. I don't have any more information off the top of my head on John Glatt. Apparently he has a ton of true crime books. Oh, here we go. Other true crime titles from John Glatt. Secrets in the Cellar, Forgive Me, Father, The Doctor's Wife, One Deadly Night, Depraved, Cries in the Desert, For I Have Sinned, Evil Twins, Cradle of Death, Blind Passion, Deadly American Beauty, Never Leave Me, Twisted. And they are all also part of St. Martin's True Crime Library. So yeah, if you want a very comprehensive, oh, it's written in 2008. If you want a comprehensive look at this case, I'd say that it did a really good job of putting forth all the tidbits and things that you would need to know for a case that you're looking into or interested in. I would also say that it's worth reading if you're into true crime. At least in my opinion, I think that it's, it was a good read. I couldn't put it down. I was deeply fascinated. I also love to know what happens. So yeah, and I got a lot more facts, or I got a lot more tidbits of information from this than I did in the podcast per se. So that is another quick book review. I'm getting better at going on less tangents, I think. So yeah, if you want to read it, I would recommend it. You can find it on Amazon. Good luck finding it in a library. I had to special order this copy. I live in New Jersey. I guess I can say she did it. I don't really know the legality of that. But she was convicted for killing him in New Jersey, in Woodbridge. And the Woodbridge Library has a copy of this. So I was able to get a copy from Warren Township, which I believe that's where Woodbridge is. Maybe I'm mistaken. But either way, it's closer than I am to Woodbridge. So you might have to special order it. I think it's on Audible. You could probably find it on Amazon. I'm sure BarnesandNoble.com probably has it, or you can find a local mom and pop shop, like an old-fashioned bookstore. I don't really know if they would have it, but you can try looking. So yes, if you would like to read true crime, I recommend it. If you would like to read not true at all, but completely fictionalized short stories where there is murder, mayhem, and unsettling, my mother calls all my things unsettling, an unsettling story, you can check out shockinglyme.com. And otherwise, I hope everyone has a beautiful day. Bye!